My friends, kindness is one of the greatest virtues a person can possess. It is a light that shines in the darkness, a reflection of God's love in this world. But hear me now. Kindness is not a command to be walked on. It is not an obligation to be used and discarded. So many of us have poured out kindness upon others, only to find our hearts drained and our spirits weary. We give, we serve, we love, and yet there are those who take without gratitude, who use our goodness for their own selfish desires. The Bible tells us to love our neighbors, yes, but it also tells us to be wise. Jesus, in his boundless mercy, healed the sick, fed the hungry, and forgave the sinner, but he was not deceived by the wicked. He did not throw his pearls before swine. He did not allow his kindness to be trampled upon, and neither should we. There are those who will mistake your kindness for weakness. They will take your compassion and twist it into an opportunity for their own gain. They will drain your spirit, leaving you exhausted, defeated, and far from God's purpose for your life. But the Lord did not call you to be a doormat. He called you to walk in wisdom and strength. My friends, kindness must be given with discernment. It is not wrong to love, but it is wrong to allow that love to lead you into bondage. You are called to serve God, not just people. You are called to live in love, but also in truth. And sometimes that means walking away from those who do not honor your kindness. Kindness is one of the most beautiful and powerful gifts we can offer to the world. It has the ability to heal wounds, mend relationships, and bring light into the darkest of situations. However, while kindness is an essential virtue, it is not something that should be given indiscriminately. True kindness comes from a heart willing to give, but that does not mean that everyone is worthy of it. Discernment is necessary to ensure that kindness remains a force for good, rather than something that is exploited or misused. Too often, people believe that kindness must be extended to everyone, without exception, regardless of how they respond to it. While it is true that kindness should not be dependent on expecting something in return, it is also important to recognize that not all people appreciate, respect, or deserve the kindness offered to them. There are individuals who see kindness not as an act of generosity, but as an opportunity to manipulate and take advantage of others. If kindness is given to those who continuously misuse it, it does not bring healing or goodness. Instead, it enables harmful behavior. One of the most common misconceptions about kindness is that it means saying yes to every request, always accommodating others and never setting boundaries. But true kindness is not about being a people pleaser. It is not about sacrificing yourself to the point of exhaustion for those who take without gratitude. A kind heart must also be a wise heart. It must know when to give and when to hold back. It must recognize when kindness is planting seeds in good soil and when it is being scattered on rocky ground where it will never grow. There are times when being kind means walking away. It means understanding that kindness is a precious gift, not something to be wasted on those who only seek to use it for their own selfish gain. A kind person must also be discerning, understanding that not everyone who asks for help truly wants to change, and not everyone who receives kindness will appreciate it. Some will see it as a sign of weakness and continue to take without ever giving anything in return. Kindness should be rooted in love, but love itself requires wisdom. It is not love to continually allow someone to harm you, manipulate you, or take advantage of your good nature. It is not love to give and give until there is nothing left of yourself. Even the purest acts of kindness must have limits. Because if kindness is not protected by wisdom, it can become a tool that others misuse. Discernment allows kindness to be given in a way that truly benefits both the giver and the receiver. It allows a person to recognize when an act of kindness will bring real change, and when it will only enable destructive behavior. A kind person must ask themselves, is my kindness leading this person toward growth, or is it allowing them to remain in a harmful cycle? Am I giving out of genuine compassion, or am I being manipulated into giving more than I should? There are moments when kindness means offering help, extending grace, and being patient with those who are struggling. But there are also moments when kindness means saying no. It means refusing to be used. It means protecting one's own heart, energy, and well-being. It means recognizing that some people are not ready to receive kindness in a way that will truly benefit them. Many people have been taught that to be kind means to endure mistreatment, to turn the other cheek repeatedly, even when it leads to personal suffering. But kindness is not about allowing yourself to be drained or mistreated. It is about giving wisely, knowing that true kindness uplifts and strengthens rather than weakens and exhausts. Consider how nature teaches us about the balance of kindness and discernment. A tree offers shade to those who seek it, but it does not uproot itself to chase after those who do not appreciate its presence. A river flows freely, giving life to all around it, but when it is misused or polluted, it becomes unfit to sustain life. In the same way, kindness must be offered freely but wisely. It must be protected so it does not lose its power. Kindness is a choice, and with that choice comes responsibility. It is not meant to be poured out endlessly without thought or care. It is meant to be given where it can do the most good, where it can truly make a difference. Those who practice kindness must also practice discernment, ensuring that their kindness remains a blessing rather than a burden. There will always be people who mistake kindness for weakness, who assume that because someone is kind, they are also easy to take advantage of. But true kindness is not about being naive or blind to the intentions of others. It is about having a heart that is both open and wise, willing to give but not willing to be used. A kind heart should never be afraid to set boundaries. It should never feel guilty for recognizing when someone is not deserving of their kindness. Boundaries are not acts of selfishness. They are acts of self-respect. A person who gives kindness without boundaries will eventually find themselves empty, unable to continue giving in a meaningful way. Kindness is one of the greatest gifts a person can give, but like all gifts, it should be given with care. Not everyone deserves your kindness, not because kindness should be withheld out of spite or judgment, but because kindness should be given where it can truly bring light, healing, and goodness. Discernment allows kindness to be a force for true change, rather than something that is wasted on those who will never appreciate or honor it. To be truly kind is to be strong. It is to love, but also to protect. It is to give, but also to know when to stop. It is to offer grace, but also to walk away when kindness is being taken for granted. It is to recognize that kindness, when given wisely, has the power to transform lives, but when given without discernment, it can lead to exhaustion and heartache. In a world that often misunderstands kindness, may we all learn to offer it with wisdom, to give it with intention, and to recognize that true kindness is a gift, not an obligation. Jesus' teachings on love are among the most profound and transformative messages in human history. He called us to love our neighbors, to show compassion, and to extend grace even to our enemies. However, while Jesus emphasized love, he also demonstrated wisdom in how he interacted with people. His love was not naive, nor was it blind to the reality of human nature. Jesus understood that not everyone had pure intentions, and he did not allow himself to be manipulated or used. Love without wisdom can lead to harm, and Jesus showed us that while we are called to love, we are also called to be wise and to protect our hearts from those who misuse our kindness. Throughout his ministry, Jesus encountered people from all walks of life. He healed the sick, forgave sinners, and welcomed the outcasts. Yet, he also knew when to be firm, when to speak the truth boldly, and when to walk away. There were times when he performed miracles openly, and other times when he told those he healed not to speak of it. He engaged in deep conversations with those who were truly seeking truth, but he also remained silent in front of those whose hearts were hardened. This was not a contradiction, but a demonstration of his wisdom. Jesus' love was always intentional. He did not simply give to anyone and everyone without considering the impact of his actions. He did not heal every person in every town he visited, nor did he feed every hungry person in Israel. His mission was guided by wisdom, and he only gave where it would serve a greater purpose. This is an important lesson for us. While we are called to love, we must also exercise discernment in how we give our time, energy, and kindness. Not everyone will appreciate what we offer, and some may even seek to take advantage of our good nature. One of the clearest examples of Jesus' wisdom can be seen in how he dealt with the Pharisees and religious leaders. These men often approached him with seemingly innocent questions, but their true intent was to trap him in his words. Jesus, knowing their hearts, never allowed himself to be deceived. He answered their questions with wisdom, turning their traps back on them and exposing their hypocrisy. He loved them enough to tell them the truth, but he did not waste his energy trying to convince those who had already hardened their hearts against him. There will always be people who pretend to seek help but have no real desire to change. Jesus knew when to engage and when to remain silent, and we must learn to do the same. Another powerful moment of Jesus demonstrating love with wisdom was his interaction with Judas. Jesus knew from the beginning that Judas would betray him, yet he still treated him with love. He allowed him to remain among the disciples, but he was never blind to his true nature. When the time came, Jesus confronted Judas, saying, "What you are about to do, do quickly." He did not beg Judas to stay or try to convince him not to betray him. Jesus understood that some people will make their choices regardless of the kindness shown to them. This is an important lesson for us. We can love people, we can pray for them, but we must also recognize when someone's heart is not willing to change. Trying to force kindness onto a person who continually misuses it will only lead to heartache. Jesus also taught his disciples to be wise as they went out to spread the gospel. In Matthew 10:16, he said, "I am sending you out like sheep among wolves. Therefore be as shrewd as snakes and as innocent as doves." This is a direct instruction to practice wisdom alongside love. He acknowledged that there are people who will seek to deceive, harm, and take advantage of his followers. He did not tell his disciples to be naive or to ignore the dangers of the world. Instead, he told them to remain kind-hearted, but also to be discerning. This is a reminder that love does not mean allowing ourselves to be used. There will be times when walking away is the most loving thing we can do for ourselves and for the other person. Jesus also demonstrated wisdom in how he responded to those who rejected him. When he sent his disciples out, he told them that if a town refused to welcome them, they should shake the dust off their feet and move on. This was a powerful statement. It showed that while love should always be offered, it should not be forced upon those who do not want it. If Jesus himself did not try to convince those who rejected him, why should we? There are times when walking away from people who continuously misuse our kindness is the wisest thing to do. Many people believe that being loving means always saying yes, always giving and always sacrificing, no matter the cost. But Jesus never taught that love should come at the expense of wisdom. He set boundaries, he walked away when necessary, and he did not waste his time on those who had no desire to receive what he offered. Love is powerful, but love without wisdom can be dangerous. It can lead to exhaustion, manipulation, and even harm. As followers of Christ, we must strive to love as he loved. This means showing kindness, forgiveness, and grace, but it also means being wise. It means protecting our hearts from those who only seek to misuse our kindness. It means recognizing when our love is bringing healing and when it is being taken for granted. Jesus never intended for his followers to be taken advantage of. He wants us to be strong, discerning, and wise in how we give our love. In every act of kindness, we must seek God's guidance. We must ask ourselves, is this kindness leading to something good, or is it allowing someone to continue in their harmful way? We must learn to love without being naive, to give without being drained, and to serve without losing ourselves. Jesus was the perfect example of love, but he was also the perfect example of wisdom. If we follow his example, we will learn to love in a way that is both powerful and wise, bringing true goodness into the world without allowing our hearts to be misused. Kindness is a beautiful quality, a gift that reflects love, compassion, and generosity. It is the power to uplift, heal, and strengthen those around us. However, not everyone will appreciate or respect kindness. Some individuals see it as an opportunity to manipulate, exploit, and take advantage of the giver. These toxic people do not view kindness as something to be valued, but rather as a weakness to be used for their own selfish gain. Understanding this reality is not about becoming bitter or withholding kindness altogether. It is about practicing wisdom. It is not unkind to set boundaries. In fact, it is one of the wisest things a person can do. Toxic people come in many forms. Some disguise themselves as friends, seeking to take more than they give. Others come as family members who manipulate emotions to get what they want. Some may even appear in professional or spiritual settings, using guilt or obligation to pressure others into serving their needs. Regardless of how they appear, toxic individuals share a common trait. They drain the energy, peace, and joy of those who extend kindness to them. They are not interested in mutual respect or gratitude. Instead, they continuously take without considering the well-being of the one giving. Many kind-hearted people struggle to recognize toxicity because they assume that everyone has good intentions. They believe that if they are generous, forgiving, and understanding, the other person will eventually change or reciprocate that kindness. While this may be true in some cases, there are individuals who will never change because they do not see kindness as a virtue. They see it as an opportunity for control. They may use flattery, guilt, or manipulation to keep receiving kindness while offering nothing in return. One of the most damaging aspects of dealing with toxic people is the emotional exhaustion that comes with constantly giving without receiving anything back. A person who continuously pours out kindness to someone who only takes will eventually find themselves drained, frustrated, and even resentful. This is not how kindness is meant to function. True kindness is life-giving, both to the giver and the receiver. When kindness is being misused, it becomes a one-sided burden that benefits only the toxic individual. This is why boundaries are essential. Setting boundaries does not mean being cruel or unkind. It does not mean withholding love or becoming harsh. Rather, it means recognizing one's own worth and refusing to allow others to take advantage of a generous heart. Boundaries protect not only the giver, but also the integrity of kindness itself. When someone sets limits on how much they are willing to give, they ensure that their kindness remains a genuine expression of love rather than an obligation forced upon them by manipulative individuals. One of the greatest challenges in dealing with toxic people is overcoming the fear of seeming unkind. Many people feel guilty when they say no, fearing that they will be perceived as selfish or unloving. Toxic individuals often exploit this fear, using manipulation to make the kind-hearted person feel responsible for their well-being. They may say things like, "If you really cared about me, you would do this for me," or "I thought you were a good person, but I guess I was wrong." These statements are not born from genuine need, but from a desire to maintain control. Recognizing this manipulation is the first step in breaking free from the cycle of being taken advantage of. Another important aspect of dealing with toxic people is understanding that their behavior is not the giver's responsibility. No matter how much kindness is shown, some individuals will never change because they do not want to. They are comfortable taking without giving, and no amount of generosity will make them suddenly become grateful or selfless. This realization can be painful, especially for those who believe in the power of love and kindness to transform lives. However, it is crucial to accept that transformation is a personal choice. No one can force another person to appreciate kindness or to act with integrity. It is also important to remember that setting boundaries does not mean giving up on kindness altogether. It simply means redirecting kindness toward those who will value and respect it. There are many people in the world who are truly in need of kindness. People who will appreciate, reciprocate, and be uplifted by genuine acts of generosity. When kindness is given wisely, it creates a ripple effect of goodness. But when it is given without discernment, it can lead to exhaustion and harm. Some people fear that walking away from toxic relationships is an act of cruelty. However, staying in a relationship where one is constantly used and mistreated is far more damaging than leaving. Walking away does not mean wishing harm on the other person. It simply means choosing to protect one's own peace and well-being. It means recognizing that kindness should never come at the cost of self-respect. Healthy relationships are built on mutual appreciation, respect, and care. When kindness is shared between two people who value each other, it strengthens the bond between them. But when one person only takes while the other continues to give, the relationship becomes toxic and unsustainable. Recognizing this imbalance is the first step toward making healthier choices. At times, setting boundaries may result in losing certain relationships. Toxic individuals do not like losing access to people they can take advantage of, so they may react with anger, blame, or even attempts to make the kind-hearted person feel guilty. This is a difficult but necessary part of the process. It is a test of one's resolve to prioritize well-being over the fear of disappointing others. True kindness does not mean enduring endless mistreatment. It means having the courage to stand up for oneself and to invest kindness where it can truly flourish. Ultimately, kindness is one of the most powerful forces in the world, but it must be used wisely. Not everyone deserves unlimited access to another person's time, energy, and compassion. Recognizing toxic individuals and setting boundaries is not a rejection of kindness, but rather a way to ensure that kindness remains genuine and meaningful. When kindness is paired with wisdom, it becomes a true force for good, benefiting both the giver and the receiver in ways that bring lasting peace and fulfillment. Kindness is a beautiful reflection of God's love, but when it is given without discernment, it can lead to exhaustion, frustration, and even manipulation. Many people, especially those with a compassionate heart, find themselves caught in a cycle of people-pleasing, believing that saying yes to every request and meeting every need is the ultimate expression of love. However, God has not called us to be enslaved by the expectations of others. He has called us to serve Him first. If our kindness is draining us, if it is pulling us away from our relationship with God, or if it is being misused by others, it is time to reassess. Our ultimate purpose is to fulfill God's plan, not to meet every human demand placed upon us. Throughout Scripture, we see that God values obedience to His will above the approval of people. Jesus Himself was the perfect example of this. Though He was compassionate and full of love, He never allowed the pressures of the crowds to dictate His mission. He healed many, but He did not heal everyone. He preached to thousands, but He also took time away to pray and rest. He loved deeply, but He did not allow Himself to be manipulated by those who had selfish motives. His focus was always on fulfilling God's purpose, not simply making people happy. This is a powerful lesson for anyone who struggles with people-pleasing. True kindness is not about sacrificing ourselves to the point of exhaustion. It is about aligning our hearts with God's will and giving in a way that brings glory to Him. Many people fall into the trap of believing that if they do not say yes to every request, they are being unkind or unloving. They fear disappointing others, being seen as selfish, or not doing enough. This mindset often leads to burnout because it is impossible to meet every demand placed upon us. People pleasers often struggle with guilt, feeling as though they are failing if they ever set boundaries. However, God never intended for kindness to be a burden. He calls us to give freely but also wisely. When kindness is driven by a need for approval rather than a genuine desire to serve God, it loses its true purpose. One of the dangers of people-pleasing is that it can lead us away from what God is actually calling us to do. When we are constantly trying to meet the expectations of others, we may neglect the specific path God has set before us. There are times when saying no to people is necessary in order to say yes to God. Jesus understood this well. He often withdrew from the crowds to pray, even when people were still seeking Him. He knew that His strength came from His connection with the Father, not from constantly giving to others. If Jesus, who was perfect in love, knew the importance of stepping away to focus on God's will, then we too must recognize that serving God comes before pleasing people. Another issue with people-pleasing is that it can open the door to manipulation. When someone realizes that a person struggles to say no, they may begin to take advantage of that weakness. They might use guilt, flattery, or even spiritual pressure to get what they want. True kindness should never be forced or given out of obligation. The Bible reminds us that God loves a cheerful giver, 2 Corinthians 9:7, which means our acts of kindness should come from a willing heart, not from pressure or fear. When kindness is constantly demanded rather than freely given, it becomes unhealthy. It is not wrong to set boundaries. It is wise. People-pleasers often take on more than they can handle because they fear what others will think if they say no. They may serve in every ministry, take on every extra responsibility, or constantly put others ahead of themselves, all while neglecting their own well-being. But even Jesus, the Son of God, rested. He took time away. He did not heal and teach every second of His life. If Jesus set limits, then it is not only acceptable but necessary for us to do the same. Rest is not laziness, it is obedience to God's design. When we continue to pour out without ever refilling our own spiritual and emotional well, we risk becoming drained, bitter, and ineffective. The enemy often uses exhaustion as a tool to weaken God's people. When we are physically, emotionally, and spiritually depleted, we become vulnerable to discouragement and distraction. We may begin to question our worth, feel unappreciated, or even doubt whether our efforts matter. But God does not call us to be burned out. He calls us to be faithful. Faithfulness does not mean doing everything for everyone. It means doing what God has assigned to us with a willing and joyful heart. One of the most freeing truths is that we are not responsible for making everyone happy. Jesus did not come to please people. He came to do the will of the Father. In fact, many were disappointed in Him because He did not fulfill their personal expectations. The Pharisees were angry because He did not conform to their religious traditions. The crowds who once praised Him later shouted for His crucifixion when He did not meet their political hopes. Yet, Jesus never wavered. His focus was on God's plan, not human approval. If Jesus faced rejection and disappointment from others for following God's will, we should not expect anything different. Our goal should not be to please people, but to be faithful to God. Walking away from people-pleasing does not mean becoming cold-hearted or selfish. It simply means choosing God's direction over human demands. It means learning to listen to the Holy Spirit rather than the pressures of others. It means recognizing that our worth is found in God, not in how much we do for people. When we realign our priorities and put God's purpose first, we will find that our acts of kindness become more meaningful and impactful. Saying no can be difficult, especially for those who have spent years believing that their value comes from making others happy. But every time we choose God's will over human approval, we take a step closer to true freedom. We must remember that we are not called to carry every burden, meet every need, or fulfill every request. That is God's job. Our role is to be faithful in what He has entrusted to us, and that includes taking care of our own well-being. True kindness flows from a place of strength, not exhaustion. But when we serve God first, He will guide us to give wisely. He will show us when to say yes and when to step back. He will teach us that it is not unkind to set limits, but rather an act of wisdom and obedience. People-pleasing leads to burnout, but serving God leads to fulfillment. When we stop living for human approval and start living for God's purpose, we will find peace, joy, and the ability to love others in a way that truly honors Him. Kindness is one of the most powerful expressions of Christian love. It reflects the heart of God, extends grace to others, and serves as a testimony of faith. However, true kindness is not weakness. It is not passive, blind, or without boundaries. Many people mistakenly believe that being kind means tolerating mistreatment, allowing themselves to be used, or remaining in situations where they are disrespected. But the life of Jesus Himself shows us otherwise. Jesus was full of love, mercy, and compassion, yet He also displayed wisdom, strength, and discernment. He knew when to extend grace, but He also knew when to walk away. In the same way, believers must understand that kindness does not mean enduring endless mistreatment. It must be balanced with strength, wisdom, and the courage to remove oneself from situations where kindness is wasted or abused. Throughout the Gospels, Jesus demonstrated unparalleled kindness. He healed the sick, fed the hungry, and comforted the brokenhearted. He showed compassion to sinners, offering them forgiveness and a new beginning. Yet, despite His boundless love, He did not force Himself upon those who rejected Him. He did not plead for the approval of the Pharisees, nor did He waste time trying to convince those whose hearts were hardened. In Matthew 10:14, He instructed His disciples, "If anyone will not welcome you or listen to your words, leave that home or town and shake the dust off your feet." This is a clear reminder that while we are called to be kind, we are not called to remain in places where kindness is trampled upon. Walking away is not an act of unkindness. It is an act of wisdom. Many people struggle with the idea of removing themselves from toxic relationships, unhealthy environments, or situations where they are consistently disrespected. They fear that doing so is unloving or that it contradicts the Christian call to forgiveness and patience. However, forgiveness does not mean allowing oneself to be mistreated indefinitely. Jesus forgave those who crucified Him, but He did not allow the religious leaders of His time to dictate His mission. He confronted hypocrisy, exposed lies, and walked away when necessary. His life teaches us that true love includes setting boundaries and standing firm in truth. One of the most striking examples of Jesus walking away is found in Mark 6, OM 1-6. When He returned to His hometown of Nazareth, the people rejected Him. They saw Him only as the carpenter's son, not as the Son of God. Their lack of faith prevented them from receiving the miracles and blessings He could have given them. Instead of staying and trying to prove Himself, Jesus left. He did not force His kindness upon those who refused to receive it. This moment is a powerful lesson for believers. Not everyone will appreciate or accept the kindness offered to them. In such cases, the best response is to step away and allow God to work in His own timing. Some people take advantage of kindness, mistaking it for weakness. They see a kind person as someone they can manipulate, guilt trip, or control. These individuals do not value kindness. They exploit it for their own benefit. Many believers, in their desire to reflect Christ's love, fall into the trap of constantly giving to those who only take. They endure toxic friendships, remain in draining relationships, and tolerate behavior that slowly wears them down. This is not what God intends. He calls His children to be kind, but also wise. Proverbs 4:23 says, "Guard your heart above all else, for it determines the course of your life." Guarding one's heart includes recognizing when kindness is being abused and having the strength to walk away when necessary. There is a difference between patience and enabling. Patience is a virtue, a fruit of the Spirit that allows believers to bear with others in love. However, enabling occurs when kindness is given without discernment, allowing destructive behavior to continue unchecked. Jesus was patient with his disciples, even when they failed to understand his teachings. He gave them time to grow and mature in their faith. But he did not enable the Pharisees and religious leaders who twisted God's truth for their own gain. He confronted them boldly, and when they refused to listen, he moved on. Some may argue that Jesus taught us to turn the other cheek, to go the extra mile, and to love our enemies. This is true, but these teachings do not mean allowing oneself to be mistreated indefinitely. Turning the other cheek is about refusing to retaliate with hatred, not about remaining in harmful situations. Going the extra mile is about serving with a willing heart, not about being taken advantage of. Loving enemies does not mean tolerating their destructive behavior. It means praying for them and leaving justice in God's hands. Jesus calls his followers to love, but he never calls them to be doormats. Knowing when to walk away requires spiritual discernment. Not every difficult relationship needs to be abandoned, and not every challenging situation is a sign to leave. Sometimes God calls believers to endure hardships for a greater purpose. However, when kindness is met with continuous disrespect, when a person's well-being is being harmed, or when remaining in a situation pulls someone away from God's purpose, it is wise to walk away. Strength is not just about standing firm. It is also about knowing when to step back. True Christian kindness is powerful when it is rooted in strength. It is not about pleasing people at any cost. It is about honoring God in the way kindness is given. It is about loving freely but also wisely. Jesus showed us that there is a time to be compassionate and a time to walk away. He calls his followers to do the same, to be kind but also strong, to love but also to discern, to give but also to guard their hearts. Kindness is most effective when it is balanced with strength, and those who follow Christ must learn to embody both. So, I urge you today, guard your heart. Love deeply but wisely. Give freely but not foolishly, and above all, seek God's will in every act of kindness. For true kindness is not just about giving. It is about giving in the right places, at the right time, to the right people. Amen.